Alright, so Colin has started hiking up the hill, probably to get service. I don't know. And so I'm trying to figure out exactly what we can do. I do have to say, it is really weird being out in the snow right now because in southern Utah, I went to the lake last Saturday.
If you've been watching Matt's off-road recovery, then you've definitely noticed her. The absolute teenage powerhouse flipping jeeps off cliffs like it's nothing, then walking away like she just stubbed her toe instead of surviving a 30-foot fall. Katelynn Boren was front and center, turning wrenches, conquering impossible recoveries, and stealing the show in every single upload, until she suddenly vanished. Comment sections are exploding. Wild conspiracy theories are taking over Reddit, and everyone is asking the exact same terrified question. Did MORR quietly axe their most fearless creator? Or is a massive behind-the-scenes scandal being swept under the rug? Who even is Katelynn Boren? Before we get into the juicy stuff, let's back up, because a lot of people watching MORR clips have no idea who this girl actually is, or how she ended up on one of the most popular off-road recovery channels on the internet. Katelynn Boren isn't some random extra who wandered into frame one day and got adopted by the fanbase. She's the daughter of Kevin Boren, and together the two of them compete under the name Crazy K's, a father-daughter off-road team that's been quietly building a serious reputation in the competitive rock-crawling world for years, long before most MORR viewers ever knew her name. Kevin isn't just her dad, he's her spotter, meaning he's the guy standing on the rocks screaming directions while she's behind the wheel trying not to die. That's the dynamic. Dad on the ground, daughter in the driver's seat, both of them fully committed to a sport that most people wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. This isn't some casual weekend hobby either. Competitive rock crawling means navigating purpose-built, heavily modified rigs across boulders, ledges, and near-vertical rock faces, often with a spotter guiding every single tire placement, because one wrong move can mean a rollover, a totaled vehicle, or worse. Events like the ones Katelynn competes in, run under organizations like WE-ROC, are judged on things like line choice, speed, and how cleanly a driver clears an obstacle without getting stuck or flipping, which means every run is a genuine test of nerve as much as skill. It's a sport dominated by adults with decades of mechanical experience, which is part of why Katelynn stood out early. She wasn't just tagging along with her dad for fun. She was actually competing and actually winning respect in a scene that isn't exactly known for handing that out to teenagers, let alone teenage girls. According to her own LinkedIn profile, Katelynn officially joined Matt's off-road recovery as a content creator in October 2023. And here's the thing, people love to skip over. That role is still listed as current on her profile, not former, not ended. Current. Her publicly visible LinkedIn profile lists the role as current, so there is no public confirmation that she was fired or left. But how does a teenage girl end up competing in one of the most dangerous motorsports on the planet in the first place? And how did that path eventually cross with one of the biggest off-road channels on YouTube? That's where it gets interesting. The crash that made her famous. If you know one thing about Katelynn Boren, it's probably this moment, because it's the clip that made her go viral outside the off-road community entirely. And it's honestly worth breaking down in full because the details are wild. Back in September 2021, Katelynn was competing in a WE-ROC competitive rock crawling event at Chokecherry Canyon in New Mexico. She was behind the wheel of her heavily modified Jeep Cherokee XJ, a rig she and her dad had built specifically for competition. She was only 15 years old at the time, which honestly makes what happened next even more insane. During the event, the Jeep hit a steep obstacle, and the whole thing unloaded. Not a little wobble, not a minor tip to the side. The vehicle rolled completely over, and then cartwheeled off a 30-foot cliff face, while a crowd of spectators and fellow competitors watched. If you've never watched off-road content before, understand that this is the kind of crash that makes an entire crowd go dead silent. And it did exactly that. Kevin, who was spotting her from the rocks, reportedly bolted down toward the wreckage in an absolute panic, along with other safety officials on site, because from where he was standing, there was genuinely no way to know if his daughter was okay after watching that fall. And then Katelynn climbed out of the mangled Jeep completely unscathed. Not banged up, not shaken and pale and needing to be carried out on a stretcher. She got out on her own 2 feet, and according to multiple accounts of the moment, the first thing out of her mouth to the stunned crowd was something like, "Somebody better have gotten that on video." That's not a Hollywood embellishment either, that's genuinely how witnesses and outlets covering the crash describe the moment playing out. It's the kind of reaction that tells you everything about who this girl is. 15 years old, just fell 30 feet in a totaled Jeep, and her first instinct was making sure the footage existed. The reason she walked away unharmed comes down to the build of the vehicle itself. Competition rock crawlers like her XJ are fitted with a custom exterior roll cage, sometimes called an exo cage, which is specifically engineered to absorb impact in exactly this kind of worst-case scenario. The cage took the hit, so Katelynn didn't have to. The Jeep itself was totaled in the fall, completely done, but she walked away without a scratch. The clip of the crash spread across Instagram and off-road forums and turned her from some kid who competes with her dad into a recognizable name in the community almost overnight, well before she ever showed up on MORR. After the wreck, she and Kevin moved on from the XJ entirely and built a custom JHF/goat-built buggy to keep competing at a higher level, and by her own account, she's continued rolling vehicles since then too, just in far less dramatic fashion than that first cliff fall. So, if that crash didn't end her career, and it clearly didn't, since she rebuilt and kept competing almost immediately, what actually explains her showing up less on camera years later? The where did she go panic. The smaller question, perhaps, is what exactly caused the internet to crash out over Katelynn's disappearing act? At some point, longtime MORR viewers noticed Katelynn wasn't appearing in every single video the way she had been for a stretch. For a channel that posts constantly, sometimes multiple times a week, any noticeable drop in someone's screen time gets picked up on fast by a dedicated fan base, and theories started circulating almost immediately. Did she quit? Did something happen behind the scenes that nobody's talking about? Was there some kind of falling out with the crew? Comment sections started filling up with speculation, and that speculation is exactly what feeds the "what happened to her" video format that's been popping up across YouTube and TikTok. One specific data point people latched onto is that Katelynn skipped the 2024 Delta Classic Rock Crawl, an event she'd reportedly been expected to compete in based on her usual schedule. And look, when a competitor who is normally locked in for an event just isn't there, of course people are going to speculate. That's a completely normal reaction. But skipping one specific competition is not the same as walking away from a sport, and it's definitely not evidence she quit MORR. Athletes and competitors skip individual events constantly for scheduling conflicts, vehicle issues, sponsor commitments, minor injuries that have nothing to do with anything career-ending, or honestly, just personal reasons that are nobody's business but their own. One missed rock crawl does not equal a retirement announcement, no matter how much a thumbnail wants you to believe otherwise. So if she didn't quit, and she wasn't fired, and skipping one event isn't proof of anything sinister, what's actually going on with her presence on the channel? What's actually confirmed? Let's lay out exactly what we know for certain, because this is where a lot of other videos on this topic just start guessing and presenting it like fact. First, that LinkedIn profile again. It still lists Matt's off-road recovery as her current employer in the content creator role, not a past one, not something she used to do. Current. If she'd left the organization, either by choice or otherwise, that's the first thing that would change, and as of now, it hasn't. Second, she is still actively competitive in off-roading. She remains associated with the Crazy K's off-road activities alongside her family, which means this isn't a case of someone who quietly aged out of the hobby, lost interest, or walked away from the community after that crash scared her off. She's still in it, still building, maybe still competing. Third, and this is honestly the detail that should end the "she disappeared" theory for good, Matt's own official content platform published a Katelynn-focused video as recently as October of 2025. An organization does not go out of its way to spotlight a creator who quit, who they cut ties with, or who's been quietly phased out. If MORR is still actively making content centered on her this recently, she's still part of what they're building, Full stop. So, when you put all of that together, here's the actual picture, and it's honestly a little anticlimactic compared to the theories floating around. Katelynn didn't vanish. She didn't get fired. She didn't rage quit after some disagreement nobody's ever actually confirmed happened. What public information actually suggests is a lot less dramatic than the thumbnails would have you believe. She simply became less visible in some videos while continuing her off-road activities and staying associated with MORR. That's it. That's the entire mystery. Content creators, especially ones who are part of someone else's channel rather than running their own solo operation, naturally have their screen time ebb and flow based on filming schedules, which trips they're on, which builds are being worked on behind the scenes, and about 100 other logistical reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with drama. Less camera time in a given stretch of videos is not the same thing as leaving for good, but if the facts really are this straightforward, why do these "what happened to her" videos keep getting made in the first place, over and over, on different platforms? Why the rumors keep spreading? Honestly, because uncertainty is good content, and everybody in this space knows it. A title like "What Happened to Katelynn" gets clicks in a way that "she's still doing great, just filming a bit less this season" simply never will. That's just the reality of how this corner of YouTube and TikTok works. And you've probably noticed the exact same pattern play out with other channel personalities who go quiet for a stretch, and suddenly there are 5 different theory videos speculating about their whereabouts, all competing for the same curious audience. It also doesn't help that Katelynn's story already has one genuinely dramatic chapter built right into it, that cliff rollover. Once an audience has watched someone survive something that intense on camera, it's an easy leap for people to assume the next unexplained gap in her appearances must be connected to something equally dramatic. Maybe another crash, maybe an injury, maybe some falling out. Nobody's talking about publicly, but surviving a rollover in 2021 and simply having lighter screen time years later, sometime around 2024, are 2 completely unrelated things that just happen to belong to the same person. One is a documented, viral, verified event with video evidence and outside news coverage behind it. The other is just normal content scheduling and event selection that got dressed up online as a mystery, because mystery performs better than "she took a break from one event." And to be clear, none of this is really a knock on anyone making videos about her. Plenty of creators are genuinely just trying to answer a question their audience is curious about, and that's a fair thing to want to cover. The issue only comes up when speculation gets presented as settled fact instead of what it actually is, which is a guess dressed up in a dramatic thumbnail. So where does that actually leave things for anyone who's a genuine fan of hers and just wants to know what she's up to these days? The community clearly hasn't forgotten her. One more thing worth mentioning before we wrap this up, because it actually backs up everything we just went through. Katelynn hasn't just stayed active behind the scenes, she's been publicly recognized by the wider off-road community too, which is a pretty strong signal for someone people online keep insisting has vanished. She was featured in a Vixen Spotlight profile through Off-Road Vixen's clothing company, a brand built specifically around celebrating women in the off-road and rock crawling scene. In that feature, she talked openly about the 2021 crash herself, describing how she took, in her own words, a nasty tumble off that 30-foot cliff and totaled the XJ, and how she came out of it unscathed and moved on to her goat-built buggy. She also shared some advice for other women trying to break into the industry, essentially telling them to stay true to themselves and not forget the people who helped them get there. That's not the messaging of someone who's stepped away from the sport or the spotlight. That's someone still actively representing it. The comment section on that feature is filled with fans calling her a badass and saying they're proud to have a young woman like her repping the sport, which tells you the community reception around her has stayed overwhelmingly positive the entire time. There's no trace of the kind of falling out energy you'd expect to find if something behind the scenes had actually gone wrong. No call-outs, no drama, just genuine support. And that lines up perfectly with everything else we've covered. A creator who quietly quit or got pushed out tends to leave some kind of trail, whether that's an announcement, a noticeably scrubbed social media presence, or at the very least, some tension visible in how the community talks about them afterward. None of that exists here. What exists instead is a LinkedIn profile that still says she works there, a family racing team that's still active, a recent MORR video built around her, and an off-road community that's still cheering her on. Every single piece of actual evidence points the same direction, and it's not the dramatic one. So next time you see one of these "what happened to her" videos pop up in your feed, you now know exactly how to check the claims yourself, instead of just trusting the thumbnail. Where things stand now. Based on everything that's actually verifiable, Katelynn Boren is still exactly where you'd expect her to be, behind the wheel, competing, and connected to both the Crazy K's and to Matt's off-road recovery. She's not a cautionary tale, she's not some quiet scandal the channel is sitting on, and she definitely didn't disappear. What she is a young woman who survived a crash at 15 years old that would have ended plenty of people's interest in the sport entirely, and instead used it as a launchpad into a better-built buggy and a continued competitive career that's still going years later. She's still tied to a family team that clearly isn't going anywhere, still out there competing under the Crazy K's name, and still recent enough in MORR's own content as of July 2026 that calling her gone just doesn't hold up against what the organization itself is actually putting out. It's honestly one of those situations where the real story is less exciting than the rumor, but it also happens to be a much better one if you actually care about her as a person, and not just as a source of drama. A teenager rolled a Jeep off a cliff, walked away laughing about whether it got filmed, rebuilt with a better rig, kept competing, and is still doing exactly that today. No scandal required. If anything, her story is a pretty good reminder to be a little skeptical the next time a thumbnail asks what happened to someone who, as far as anyone can actually confirm, is doing perfectly fine and just wasn't in this week's upload. So that's the real story behind Katelynn Boren, the crash that made her famous, the rumors that tried to write her off, and what the actual evidence says about where she stands with MORR today. No secret firing, no dramatic exit, just a competitor who's still out there doing exactly what made people fall in love with her content in the first place. If you enjoyed this deep dive and you want more videos that actually dig into what's verified versus what's just internet speculation, this channel is the place for it. Drop a like if you learned something new, and let me know down in the comments who you want us to look into next, because there's no shortage of what happened to theories floating around the off-road world right now, and we're happy to fact-check every single one of them. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss the next deep dive when it drops. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.